Yeah, you see the title. Now, before you jump the gun, hear me out. I'm a huge Spider Man fan, have been ever since I was really young, like 5 years old or younger. Now, as an adult, I'm very critical of Spider Man content, and this movie is no exception to that. But don't get me wrong, this movie is entertaining and had an awesome fun time watching it in theaters, but like everything else in the world, it has flaws, and these flaws are what hold this movie back from being great. Spoilers ahead, of course. Now, you'd probably be surprised, but most of this movie's problems stem from it being the first half of a two-parter. Let me explain. Movies are generally supposed to be one and done stories. It's part of what makes them so popular. The convenience of just sitting down for an hour or two and having a complete story fed to you on the big screen. This is also why movie sequels tend not to rank as high compared to their predecessors, as sequels try to recreate the magic of the original, but in life, the first time you experience something is usually more impactful than the second or third. It's often difficult for directors or writers of sequels to think up of a story when the original ties up most loose ends and the protagonist has reached their full envisioned character growth, even if it's with the same writer. There are exceptions to this, of course, where the sequel either matches or even surpasses the original, but it's very uncommon. However, with Across the Spider-Verse, we can't tell if it's accomplished this or not because it's not a complete story. Across the Spider-Verse sets up multiple things and resolves almost none of them. The impending threat of the Spot is dropped halfway through, Miguel's conflict with Miles being an anomaly isn't resolved, and the movie ends on a cliffhanger with Miles lost on an Earth without Spider-Man. There's no real payoff for this movie, making its worth dependent on its own sequel, Beyond the Spider-Verse. Let's compare it to Avengers Infinity War, which also ended a cliffhanger in which its sequel Endgame rounded out the rest of the story. However, Infinity War can still stand on its own due to being Thanos' story and mainly resolving things set up in prior films. This movie, however, simply can't. Another issue is due to half of the story not being enough to really fill out the film's runtime, its pacing can drag on in certain scenes. Examples being, if you compare this movie's reintroduction to Spider-Gwen to the first one's, it's essentially a dragged out version, with the only expansion being she's on the run from her police chief dad, something that should have gotten more screen time rather than an origin recap. Or Miles' first battle with Spot. It goes from entertaining to feeling like they're just goofing off. Alternatively, and preferably, the film also fills time with fan service, showing off the different Spider people, which is fun, and honestly my favorite part was seeing Josh Keaton's spectacular Spider-Man again, giving some form of closure to fans of an amazing adaptation that was done dirty over a decade ago. So imagine buying a copy of Across the Spider-Verse, watching it a couple of times, or putting it on for someone new to Spider-Man, and then for whatever reason, you don't have access to the sequel. You are left with half a story with no conclusion. As a standalone story, it has few merits, and these problems would be easily solved if they went with the original titles of Across the Spider-Verse Part 1 and 2, but of course, marketing. A random person sees Spider-Man Across the Spider-Verse Part 2, they're probably gonna dismiss it on the off chance they didn't go see Part 1, thinking it's required to understand Part 2, and for some, that's too much work. While with the title Beyond the Spider-Verse, they won't know what to expect. They did the same thing with Avengers Endgame. It was originally titled Infinity War Part 2. In the end, Across the Spider-Verse sets up multiple things and resolves almost none of them, with an over-reliance on fan service to drag out time. The film is still fun and enjoyable, but as a standalone movie, it's lacking. Hopefully, Beyond the Spider-Verse is so good it justifies Across the Spider-Verse mostly being set up. Naturally, these are my opinions that can change over time. Anything you want to add or discuss, comment down below. Like and subscribe. This has been the Rogue Ranger, and have a nice day.